I just thought I would share a little bit with you about why sound and music are as important as they are. So one of my heroes is Evelyn Glennie. And Evelyn Glennie, as some of you may know, is profoundly deaf. She was deaf since the age of 12. But she is a world-class musician and a percussionist, which, as some of you will know, is probably one of the most sort of critically important types of musicianship from the point of view of timing. She takes to the stage in bare feet and she feels the sound through her feet. What is sound? We know it's longitudinal vibrations of the air. We know that our hearing is limited to a range, which we sort of typically say is between 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz. That means that the actual length of the waves go from about 17 meters, which is about the length of this room, down to about 17 millimeters, which is about that much. So they're quite sort of human-sized waves. And sound doesn't move very quickly. Speed of sound, 343 meters per second at 20 degrees and sea level. So takes 3 seconds for sound to go a kilometre. So it's not very quick. How do we actually perceive it? Well, we've got a couple of these bolted to our heads. The sound arrives at the tympanic membrane. There's some little bones there called the ossicles, and those in turn sort of amplify and vibrate a membrane inside the cochlea, and from there the clever bit happens because it's then translated into electrical impulses, which are actually what transmits the signal to your brain where the processing is done. The ear is incredibly sensitive, incredibly sensitive. Sound pressure levels are measured in decibels typically, and it's a logarithmic scale, and scientists in the room, don't stop me if I get this wrong. 3 dBs of sound represents a doubling in the power of the sound. You can hear a mosquito in your bedroom if it's quiet at night at maybe 20 dBA. If you're in a really loud nightclub or next to a jet aircraft where it's getting painful, it might be 120 dBA. That's 100 dBs of dynamic range. That represents a sound volume level difference of about 2 to the 33, John, if I'm not wrong, which is about 8.5 billion times from the quietest to the loudest in terms of the actual volume of the sound. So your hearing is incredibly sensitive. And as I said, you've got 2 of them. And because sound is relatively slow, the phase differences mean that your 2 ears give you directional information. This is why we need stereo and surround sound. So in evolutionary terms, your animals and your mammals and your birds use song and sound to communicate and to create identities. So if you record bird song, you can tell one bird from another bird just by the difference in its song. And in humans, this facility has grown, and it's what gives us speech and what gives us song. And actually, anthropologists now are pretty certain that it was song that preceded speech. So the song that animals made was gradually developed by us humans, and it became speech and it became song. But the really, really cool thing, we learnt to sing together. We learnt to do things in time together. And that is probably one of the primary engines of socialization and the cause of human development. So that gives you perhaps a bit of an idea about why sound is so sort of subjectively important to us. It's so deep in our psyche. It is absolutely what binds us together, what enables us to communicate. Speech and song were the tools of the oral tradition. So they were the means of people communicating history. They were the way that the human race developed and managed to learn the lessons of predecessors, unlike animals, which have to keep learning them over and over. We were able to learn from our ancestors because these traditions were passed down in music and in song. Methods of recording the words started 3000 BC or something with the first sort of writing. But it actually wasn't until the 16th century that people learnt to actually create scores for music. So by about 1547, I think it was, the first sheet music started to appear, and people started to be able to actually play the same thing as someone else. It wasn't a recording, but it was, in a way, a recording of what somebody else had played. But then, of course, towards the end of the 19th century, everything started to change when the technology started to play a part in it. And I'm just going to whiz you very quickly through the chronology. So here's Alexander Graham Bell with the first telephone. So now we're talking to each other, but at a distance. Okay. 1889 saw the first gramophone disc, so now we're actually able not only to record the sound and make multiple copies of it, which is obviously a significant event, but we're also able to now choose when we listen to it. So we don't have to go along to a concert and wait till the band strikes up. We can put the needle on and we can listen to it when we want to. The wire recorder comes a little bit later, and I've included this because this obviously plays, this is a precursor, a tape machine, and this plays a huge role in recorded music as we go forward. 1910 saw the first public radio broadcast. Radio invented sort of, well, the science of it was Maxwell, Faraday and Hertz. But there's an English gentleman called Oliver Lodge and a Scottish gentleman called Alexander Muirhead, who happens to be my great-great-great-uncle, who first demonstrated radio. And where did they do it? In Oxford, at the Clarendon Labs, the first demonstration of radio working. So that's where I get my sort of electronics gene from, I think, if indeed I have one. There'll be people here who argue I don't. So the movies, we had silent movies, and then we had talkies, and the first feature film presented as a talkie was The Jazz Singer, which was actually in 1927, I think. And then we had television. And one of the interesting things, and this continues to be a trend to this day, is that developments in television follow sound by a number of years. So you see later on we have a compact disc, then the DVD. And the reason for that is the complexity of the technology. So in 1954 we had the first multi-track tape machine. This is an Ampex 3-track developed from a video recorder. And this changed things a lot in the music production industry because for the first time it enabled you to layer things, to record something and then record something subsequently and mix it together with what you'd originally recorded. So this gave birth to multi-track recording, which is really the tool of musicians all over the world now. And then Akio Morita at Sony made it portable. Akio Morita nearly spent all Sony's money trying to produce a pocket-sized battery-powered player and invented the cassette in the process. He didn't actually succeed, and out of frustration, when his partner told him he had to launch the product, he had some shirts made with bigger pockets so that the thing would fit in there. That's what I call lateral thinking. And then in 1982 came the CD, and now we're moving into the digital world. And from a business point of view, this is just wonderful because now you've got to go out and buy all those records that you've got, but you've got to pay for them again twice as much, and they won't sound as good. Something wrong there, surely. And then a bit later, as I said earlier, TV pictures come later. People figured out how to get a bit more on the disc and how to deal with the getting the data on and off quickly, and then came the DVD. Then we had digital audio players. The iPod wasn't the first of the MP3 players, but it obviously was one of the best known ones, mainly because of iTunes. And now the internet has become one of the key ways that we deliver sound. So there's a quick romp through some of the relevant technology. But if we go back to the 60s, when the Beatles were in the studio with George Martin, it was really the musical explosion of that era that stimulated and was partly driven by the inventiveness of UK companies. So companies like SSL were actually born out of that sort of explosion of the music industry. And it was a time of great innovation and growth, and that was sort of paralleled by the commercial success of the record business, the TV industry and the movie business. So I just thought, just to wrap this up, just talk about some of the sort of fundamentals of production process. It's actually very simple. We record the sound with the microphone, we mix it together and route it and process as we need to, and then we play it back again. So it's always going to start analog, at least if it's got an acoustic instrument, and it's always going to have to end analog because your ears are effectively an analog device. But what goes on in between can use a variety of technologies. So that's live applications. If we're recording, then typically we just add to that picture a recorder of some sort, Back in the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s it was a multi-track recorder. Nowadays, of course, it's a digital audio workstation software that runs on your Mac or your PC. So that's a very simple process, but it turns out that the workflows involved in the different types of production get pretty complex, with the requirements of providing cue feeds, formats, different outputs in different formats, and the very large palette of sound processors that are now available to music creatives. So it can get quite complicated, and presenting this to the user creates quite an ergonomic challenge. So one of the things that we deal with here, as well as all of the signal processing stuff, is how to actually present this to the user in a friendly and intelligible way that minimises the amount of alpha energy that you take up with the mechanical task and maximises the zeta energy that you can give to the creative process, which is always one of our sort of underlying design philosophies. So that's probably enough for me. We're going to take you through 4 different application areas in our studios next door here, and then we'll meet back here hopefully at about 10 to 8.
I get so lost sometimes. Days pass and this emptiness fills my heart. When I want to run away, I drive off in my car.
I hope you've had a good evening. We've got some food here as well, so if you'd like to help yourselves to that, please go ahead. But thank you very much again.